Thank you, Ray. Dan, thank you for the invitation today to speak to the National Watershed Coalition. Very excited to be here. Just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for what wanted to talk about today. This presentation kind of arose out of a conversation Dan and I had back in the spring, sharing a piece of pizza. And it's not a technical engineering discussion. It's really more sort of an awareness communication type presentation about how we as an industry get behind our watershed dams. It's a great network of infrastructure that has served our nation and our states well. I've kind of been living in this world for about 15 years. I'm very passionate about these floodwater retarding structures, and just wanted to kind of pass on some things that we've been doing more recently. So kind of problem statement. Yeah, our infrastructure is aging. What do we do now? I wanted to kind of pass on some asset management thoughts that we've been trying to adopt, working with local sponsors and local communities. Really, the main theme for today's discussion is so many times from the engineering side, we talk about dam safety in terms of risk, i.e. liabilities of a dam were to breach. But as I've gotten more and more involved in these types of projects, I'm really passionate that we really need to talk, flip the conversation, talk about benefits, all of the wonderful things that these dams are doing for us, and then making sure that our local communities and decision makers are understanding that. So with that, kind of jump into the presentation here. I wanted to start just with a quick overview about asset management. And we talk about asset management in terms of, so many times when we're talking about these dams, it's, hey, they were designed and built back in the 50s and 60s, and they're doing a great job. And sometimes they're a little bit out of sight, out of mind. We are trying to bring to the forefront that, these assets are deserving of reinvestment and being taken care of. So we've worked with several local sponsors with portfolios of 40, 50, 60, 80 dams, and a lot of times it's you start the conversation of just fundamentally where do we start, and what do we do. Right now, I think where we are as an industry is we're kind of in this, we're on the mature end of the life cycle. So we're operating and maintaining these dams, but we're often faced with the decision of how do we modify and upgrade these dams to meet current criteria. And then, the idea of decommissioning is not something that anyone, really wants or prefers as options typically, but, that is obviously, an option that is commonly looked at in the NRCS planning process. So in terms of asset management basics, I think there's basically 6 fundamental steps. And I kind of delineated these between sort of yellow and green. Yellow steps with the yellow arrows there being, these are tasks that are quite honestly, they're maybe the engineering side of things. As an engineer, it's kind of where I get focused. But sometimes that's actually the most straightforward part of analyzing a portfolio of dams. I wanted to kind of call more attention to, and we'll talk about later in the presentation, about the green arrows. It's really where local sponsors, the dam owners, state agencies can help sell what these dams do. It's more of an idea of, hey, the engineering is actually not that hard. It's communicating and getting the communities to understand why these assets are so important and why we need to reinvest in them. I think that's actually one of our greater challenges going forward. Due to time, I know we got started a few minutes late here. The next few slides I was gonna give just a quick overview of some asset management portfolios that we've done for different dam owners. I'm going to kind of just hit the high points of these because I do want to kind of focus on these benefit discussions. But main idea here is the project I'm talking about today, we assessed 50 dams in 3 different watersheds, took about 6 months. And one of the outputs when working with the local sponsors, we needed to communicate our results in a very graphical way so that they could turn around and talk to the mayors and the county commissioners and the local decision makers and not have to go through a 500-page report. But hey, here's just the basic findings of the study, and this is where we need to focus our resources. So we did have a big report, but the only thing that ever gets used are these maps. So what you're looking at is a map of the county in question, the distribution of these NRCS dams throughout the county. And we adopted a real basic yellow, orange, red, orange, yellow, green type framework that is, commonly understood as like, hey, red is where I need to focus, green, that's good to go. The previous slide was a summary of how we went out and quickly did site assessments of the dams, of the physical condition, more or less an indication of how the dams were with respect to their O&M activities. This slide is we also dropped in and looked at the hydraulic adequacy of the dams. For those of y'all that work around these watershed dams, hydraulic adequacy is a big driver eventually in terms of what needs to be done to these structures to get them up to speed. Again, using that simple color coding so that when we sat down with the county commissioners, they could see, hey, these are where the dams are pretty significantly undersized, and that's where it's going to take some serious resources to get those updated. And then this last slide here is a simple performance and criticality matrix. This is common in applying asset management principles. We had to kind of go through a process of how to take these principles and practices and apply them to dams. But this slide is sort of the take-home slide that is commonly used when we're talking to the local decision makers. In one sheet of paper, kind of conveys the distribution of the dams in this given county, and really where priorities need to be focused. So that's just a quick overview of some fundamental how to apply asset management principles to a large portfolio of dams. But I want to spend the balance of our time here walking through benefits and have a case study, a real case study. I've tried to make all of these sites somewhat anonymous, but the next set of dams is actually this is real world stuff. So, and this is really where I want, if I were to kind of wish list, recommend to the audience of kind of takeaways and actionable things that we can do as an industry, is really this idea of when we talk about our watershed dams, yes, there are risks. Yes, that we do have to perform breach analyses and inundation mapping and have to have emergency action plans. And that's all great. I mean, that is truly the dam safety perspective, and it's what we need to do to kind of keep the public safe. But 99% of the time, these dams are out there in the watershed doing their job. And so I kind of created this little graphic. Some of these are well known. We talk about sediment storage, erosion control. We talk about flood control. But more and more as we go through, supplemental watershed planning process and trying to make the argument that these assets are worth reinvesting in, I think that there's opportunity within the industry to get more creative about how we talk about those benefits. I'll admit I'm not a PR&G expert by any means, fairly familiar with it. It's a very, I think it's a great framework to make some of these more ancillary arguments about the multi-purpose, even if it's not a formal quote unquote multi-purpose structure, what benefits these dams are bringing to our communities. Next couple of slides, I just kind of wanted to walk the group through. This is again a real real site. Just I didn't give a background. I live in Fort Worth, Texas, so I do a lot of work in the Dallas Fort Worth metroplex. This is a a large population, lots of development. So the next set of slides, I'm going to kind of walk you through, which I think a lot of folks on this call are familiar with the development that goes on in and around these structures. So this is an aerial view from 1995. The two lakes are kind of highlighted in blue there. Yellow box basically is the next set of slides is going to kind of show how development has progressed in and around these structures. So 1995, you can still see probably pretty active farming. You can see the terracing up above these structures. Both of these dams were definitely built and constructed, back in the early 60s. You see just a little bit of development down here. So now we jump to 6 years later, 2001. Now we've seen subdivisions kind of come in near the lake. One of the maps I'll show here in a little bit is, I think these lakes definitely are value creators from a tax base perspective. So you see some sort of shoreline lakeside development coming into the picture, and then you're also starting to see some downstream development. Fast forward to 2012, these developments have filled out. Now you're on the north side of the lake, and again, one thing to point out is these subdivisions are coming in, lots of houses. You can kind of see now that there's a regional trail system around the lakes. It's a little bit hard to see in this view, but a lot of green space adjacent to the lake, basically in the flood pool. They've put in a trail system, green space creation, and you're starting to see development kind of fill in and around these sites. Jumping forward to 2020, now you can kind of see just a big picture. I mean, there has been a lot of development, a lot of value creation from a taxing perspective developed within the watershed. These subdivisions have filled out. I think in general, people are like being near these lakes. They see them as an amenity and an enhancement. And then sort of this last slide here is just this green circle is, I think we can all guess what's going to happen here in the next few years. We would expect, again, in the vicinity of this smaller upstream dam, that's obviously going to fill in with some sort of development. So as I was sitting around with our guys kind of talking about this presentation, we came up with the ideas like, well, hey, wait, what if we went to the tax appraisal district, pulled that data and developed a heat map based on values, with the idea is, sort of the working hypothesis is there more value associated with, in this case, residences being, fronting these lakes? And ultimately, if there is an increase in tax value, shouldn't the case be made that incremental increase is actually due to the lakes and the benefits they provide, and then take that case to the local sponsors and go, hey, how about ponying up some additional resources? These dams are providing the benefits. How about ponying up more resources to help take care of them? So it was an interesting kind of hypothesis. We did not know the answer when we started this, but I think you can kind of clearly see in this subdivision, with the darker blues being higher priced residences, and as you move to yellows, oranges, and reds, not, that's on the lower value end of things. And I think you can kind of clearly see that the proximity to these lakes is a value creator. So I wanted to kind of close out. Again, this is my Murphy's sort of personal opinion here on what we can do as an industry going forward. These are just kind of simple communication tips. I think probably some of the folks on this call were also at the TAWS meeting here in Texas a month ago. I think one of the best things that came out of that meeting was the need for us as an industry to do a better job of communicating with local leaders, decision makers. So first and foremost, this item number one, as I kind of thought about putting this presentation together, I think we're in a phase where we actually need to re-educate our communities about what these dams do. I think when these dams went in the 50s and 60s, they were for a fairly singular purpose, and they have done their job well. But as our, you know, cities, counties, states have developed, I think the enhancements these watershed sites are providing have evolved, and I think we need, as an industry, to do a better job of kind of capturing that. Item number two, think items really number two and three really hand in hand. We really need to flip the discussion. Don't think about these dams as well. They're risk, and there's always a risk of a breach, and oh my goodness, what are we going to do with that? No, let's talk about the asset side of what these dams are doing day in and day out. Be creative with identifying the benefits. PRNG is a great framework to capture that when you're going through the planning process. But again, you've got to engage the local communities, because they honestly they have as good or better understanding of the value creation that these lakes create. Something I've become more and more attuned is, especially when you're talking with non-technical folks, you got to communicate in the universal language as money. And I think you've got to go back to, use an example of what we just did on that previous kind of value heat map. Take that to the local sponsors and go, look, I mean, the proof's in the pudding. These lakes create more value from a tax-based standpoint with their proximity, and use that data as leverage to help fund and generate interest behind these structures. Building local leadership, as you see day in and day out. Gosh, it's so important to have the local sponsors engaged and interested and excited about preserving these assets. Last, and I think probably the most important, is to be positive, and that kind of ties into, let's focus on the assets, not just the liabilities. Hey, our government made a great investment 60, 70 years ago. It's now our turn to take care of these investments, and man, we should be excited. We should be thankful for the infrastructure we've been given, and we should be excited about the opportunity to kind of pass that on, pay that forward. And then I know this is cut off. Ray and I were doing a little bit of formatting here, but I think it's in the operative word here is left out, so it's a little bit of in suspense. But I think a critical question is, what would our watershed and our communities look like without these dams and lakes? And kind of let that sink in. And when we're having these critical conversations with local leadership of why it makes sense to reinvest in this infrastructure, ask them that question. And if people don't like the answers, then that leads on to the next discussion of, hey, okay, let's make this a priority and reinvest. So Ray, hopefully I came in Friday at 12:30. Didn't leave a ton of time there for questions and answers. Be happy to take those.
Well, let's
this
do
slide
that.
is
Yeah.
this slide is my contact information. I welcome anyone to reach out to me. Hopefully these opinions are taken as mine and mine only.
Right.
I definitely don't represent the
Yeah.
NRCS by any way, but these are just my observations and suggestions as we go forward. So Ray and Dan, thank you all for the opportunity. I really appreciated having the chance to be here today.
Thank you, Murphy. And let's take a couple of questions. And again, we're using the question and answer area of your dashboard for doing your questions and answers, some of which may be typed in afterwards. Murphy will have the opportunity to type in answers that we don't get to, but let's take on a couple just for fun. One, Murphy, for increased property values, what was the baseline? And what exactly is the incremental increase that you found?
Sure. So the baseline was, we didn't do this over time. We basically were just taking a one snapshot view, and really the baseline was, we were looking at proximity to the lakes and sort of as you got closer, do values increase? And again, like most things, it doesn't hold in all cases, but in a general sense, it does. And so that was really just more of a subjective look at it. Trust me, we didn't go way deep with that sort of value assessment. But after having looked at that, we all kind of looked around the room and were like, man, maybe we should do that more.
So a second question while you're right there, do you consider the conservation benefits of decommissioning versus rehabilitation of the dams?
I mean, the answer is absolutely. I mean, when you go through the formal, planning process, that without project alternative is obviously always a baseline, and that's in the what we call the formal planning framework. Um, you know, the the presentations, the content I was trying to present today was it is a little bit leaning towards keeping these structures in place, keeping them doing what they're doing. It wasn't as much decommissioning, but as we all know, at the local level, um, if a community doesn't find value and they don't want to reinvest, then yeah, that decommissioning is probably going to bubble to the top in that setting.
You got a nice compliment. Appreciate that. Great infographics was mentioned here. And let's take on another one. Could you briefly highlight the elements of criticality and performance metrics used in your assessment? And if you'd rather do that offline and type an answer to that individual, I understand. If you want to take it
Sure.
live, you can do that too.
Well, I'll do it live in hopefully 30 seconds or less. So
Alrighty.
on performance, we looked at the dam's physical condition, and I can send you some information if you want to contact me offline about how we developed a scoring sheet for the physical condition. So that was one part. The other part of performance was the hydraulic adequacy,
Mhm.
basically comparing against TR60 and state criteria. And in terms of criticality and working with a sponsor, we just looked at population at risk. That was the primary criticality metric, and then we developed a weighting system between performance and criticality to spit out metrics through that framework.
Excellent. Did you see any declines in housing values premium with the age of the dam?
With the age of the dam,
Mm-hmm.
no. Um, the situations we were looking at, mm, development was generally increasing and moving towards the dam. So I think in some ways maybe that kind of gives you an indication. And for those of y'all that haven't been to Texas or don't know Texas, uh, people love water in Texas because we don't have a ton of it. And so any little pond or puddle of water we get super excited about. So
Yeah.
I realize that doesn't necessarily hold for the rest of the nation here. So
Yeah. He said later, he said, I meant the age of the houses instead of the age of
oh,
the dams.
sorry, age of the
Age
houses.
of the houses he came back with. Yeah.
No, we didn't actually look at that. Y'all are kind of giving us good ideas. I may have opened a whole new type of analysis here. So, but that actually would be interesting to look at.